All right. Welcome to Class 8 in Telling Your Life Story. And my name is Dave Bradshaw, if this is your first time joining us. And I'm excited to be here, seems amazing like that it's been 2 months since we started, but so it has been. And we did get the okay to continue the class through March. So, and I'm possibly going to be starting it down in Venice as well. So I'm working on some I worked up the curriculum for 8 weeks, but I've got some things coming. Next week we're going to cover tips on writing well for the next couple of weeks. And then I'm writing a summary of this book, Undefended Love, which we'll cover for the next two, which I think will be interesting. So I hope you all are progressing well with your autobiography. Do you have the notes for Class 8, or anybody need a copy of it?
No, I have it.
I do.
You need it? Do you have it? Or
I have
got
it.
the whole book, and that's why I'm late. I
Okay, you
looked
forgot it.
all over for my book. I couldn't find it.
That's okay.
So
I have extras. Here's Class 8 outline, and for you, and hopefully
And I have it.
if anybody else comes, I've got a couple more. Title of this week's is Ego Building Youth, and subtitled The Ego's Cycle of Birth, Life, and Death. And so that's going to be our topic today. And I did bring along a draft of the story of my life, and it's being printed and I think going to be delivered this next week. So by next week, I'll have printed copies in color, and I'll have the booklet for the class, at least the first 8 weeks of it, printed also that I will make available. So this first series that we're doing has been, plowing the ground, so to speak, for future classes. And I think everybody I talked to, it's funny, I read something that 80% of people say they want to write a book. And yet, the statistic I saw is that only 1% actually do it.
wow. Yeah.
So welcome to you, the 79%ers that are actually going to go into the 1%ers as you work on your book. And that gives you an idea of just how many people feel the task is too daunting to actually do, unless they have some help to break it down into smaller little pieces. And so it feels really good when you finish your first draft, but then the work only really just begins because the polishing up of it is what would make the difference between something that's smooth and interesting to read and something that is kind of choppy and more difficult to read. So you have to really be willing to take a machete, so to speak, and cut it down. So anyway, today we're now in this part of it dealing with our youth and childhood. If we followed the outline that I put, which was starting from our retirement and working backwards in time. I'm still not sure that's the best way to do it, but that's the way I did it, and that's the way I suggested that we do it in this class. The good thing is, in the booklet form of this, if we decide as the class that we'd rather just do it chronologically, more, left brain, starting at the beginning, going to the end, then we can just start reading the last chapter and go forward with it. So, but I titled today's The Ego's Cycle of Birth, Life, and Death. I'll just read you a little bit. Our earliest experiences as an infant is a very magical time of connection with both our mother as well as our Creator, or as some call it, the ground of being. This state of divine union reflects our original goodness, our original purity, and total surrender. I mean, all you have to do is look into a newborn's face and you see this radiance. It's contagious. This luminosity, as it's called, is perceived and experienced when you're in the presence of a newborn, which parents witness in this first stage of self evokes a unconditional love. And so this is what the parents are privy to that few others other than other relatives are able to see, is just how beautiful and wonderful the child is. You might say the child is a whole person. It's not a fragmented or divided person. So in birth, right after our birth, and in death, by the way, or as a result of spiritual practices, we learn to let go of our ego. So we start by building our ego, and the last thing we do is let go of it. As we grow, the self moves toward increasing differentiation. That is to say, there's a dawning sense that between the self and the non-self, as the child realizes that the mother is not part of itself, it's actually separated from the self. At first, when they're first born, you're one with your mother, right? You are literally, you're breastfeeding oftentimes, or being bottle fed, you're nurtured, you're the only eyes you're really looking into for acceptance and love are your mother and fathers, but the mother has a special connection. So this first differentiation happens, it launches us, so in birth we begin our ego, and in death we begin to lose it. As we grow, the self moves toward differentiation and a dawning sense of me, as the author Kathleen Dowling Singh puts it in her classic book called The Grace in Dying. This developing sense of child enables the first dualism between self and non-self. Okay, so we begin again as a whole self, but then we start to differentiate and say, I'm not my mother, and this begins the first of several dualisms that we will go through in life, that I am separate from my mother, and I am separate from you, and separate from other people. So this developing consciousness of a child establishes the first dualism, and it's very relevant because if you can imagine this process going in reverse as we go through the dying process, it's the very last boundary that we erase in dying, is the differentiation between ourself and everything else. In other words, we merge back into love, pure love, or whatever you want to call it, God, the ocean of which the streams flow into. There's a lot of different metaphors to explain this process, but the point is, it's the first demarcation that we make and the last to let go when we die. So then the first dualism launches us into a lifetime of building our ego, and it spawns the concept of space and time. We begin to make the distinction between the past, the present, and the future, and and this develops into the second distinction, which is the difference between life and death. So prior to going through these dualisms, we don't perceive. It's only when a child begins to see, that little bug is now dead, or if, heaven forbid, they come across a human that they recognize as dead. And this sometimes happens. It's not really healthy, but the point is they begin to recognize life from death, the separation. And these first two dualisms between self and non-self, and life and death, she says, excuse me, let me see where I am. I should have brought my glasses. These first two dualisms we develop in early childhood seek to divide and separate everything. Our thoughts from our feelings, and thus removing us from the experience of wholeness that we once had, and being the ability to realize unquestioning love is where we came from. We begin to question everything, divide everything. This is what you can see in children in elementary school, where they begin to see that, you know, you're taller than me, or I'm fatter than you, or, you know, you're prettier than I. And we begin to, you know, and this is a lifetime process of comparing ourselves, dividing ourselves. And it's a normal part of building our ego because we determine who we are, but it's quite frankly, later as we mature, hopefully we outgrow it. Some people never do. Some people are constantly, till the day they die, comparing themselves with everyone else, looking for, you know, how am I better or worse, etc. So then the third dualism, which they say happens usually in school, early school years, is between your mind and your body. This usually is developed in early and middle childhood. According to Ms. Singh, quote, the loss is immense. We lose our deep integrity and unity of body and mind, which is the unity of feeling and attention, the ability to be present. And so, if it seems hard for us to not be fearful of the future and regretful about the past, oftentimes living in those, it's because for much of our life we you know, since early childhood we've begun separating those things, and we've lost this unity of feeling and attention and ability to be present. We have to be very intentional about trying to restore it, I believe. And that can be done through prayer, meditation, other types of spiritual practices that cause you to stop and reflect rather than just going about your life as it always goes. So if it seems hard to be present, there's a reason for it. It's because we've grown into the habit of not being present, of always being thinking about the next thing we're going to say when we talk to somebody, or regretful of the thing we didn't do yesterday, and you know, and beating ourselves up. So this ability to be present, as she says, is an immense loss as we begin to separate our mind and body. The fourth dualism is our persona, or our acceptable self, which would be our false self. That's the, our acceptable self versus our shadow self. Instead of true self, I should have put acceptable there, but the point is, she says, and by shadow self, what we mean is this consists of all the parts of ourself that we don't want to face. We can't see ourself, and we're just sort of blinded by ourself and not able to see. That's why friends and family and counselors can help us see that hidden shadow self, as it's called. And it's not bad to have a shadow self, but it's impossible to sometimes get to your true inner self when you can't really see yourself well. So she says about this, that this consists of the parts of ourself that we cannot see or we disown. That is, we just say, oh, that's not me. You know, I'm mindful of a book by a seminary teacher entitled The Return of the Prodigal Son. And he says he used to read the parable in the Bible, the prodigal son. His name's Henry Nouwen, by the way. And he read it as he was the prodigal son. And, you know, he was the one that went off and disappointed his father and then eventually came back and asked for forgiveness. But talking about shadow self, his friend says, oh no, I think of you much different than that. I think of you as the older brother, the one who was so full of himself, if you remember the story, that he actually got angry when the prodigal came back and the father forgave him. He got mad. He says, what am I, chopped liver? You know, I've been with you my whole life and you know, serving you day by day, and you never gave me a golden ring or you know, threw a feast for me or gave me a special coat. And so he became very prideful of his, you know, religiousness and following all that his dad said. So when Henry turned to his friend and said, really? You think I actually am more like the older brother than the prodigal son? And it caused him to really reflect on his life and begin to see himself as others saw him. So he got face to face with his shadow self thanks to somebody that leveled with him about how he was perceived. And that's a good example of why we can't see this shadow self. But so this personal consciousness during this period, our personal consciousness believes its apparent independence and self-control, end quote. In the early years, quote, we become lost in our own dramas, we forget our original nature and goodness, writes Singh. So is it any wonder why by the time, you know, a lot of people are facing, usually this happens in midlife or second half of life anyway, where we begin to face our uglier self, and sometimes in writing our own autobiography we can do that too, which is actually very healthy, one of the reasons why it's considered therapeutic. So so this is the life cycle, and then from there, as we go into the nearing death experience, this actually reverses order. And so typically the thing, once we start to face this, we begin to see a unification of our mind and body. We begin to understand that there's really not a big differentiation between life and death. We're just spiritual beings experiencing a human experience, okay? And so we're headed back toward being spiritual beings. But the point is the very last, like I said, line that we get erased is this between ourself and non-self. And so Kathleen Dowling Singh is rather uniquely qualified to talk about this, having served as a hospice nurse for 30 years, sitting bedside with thousands of people as they pass and observing the process. And so I highly recommend her book. It's in the bibliography in your notes of the 55 questions. Her book is in there. And I did do a book review on it, and if you'd like, I'm happy to email it to you next time I send something, because it's more of a Cliff's Notes of the book, because I got so much out of it. I read it during the time my mom was passing, and it gave me great comfort, and I'd never heard anyone explain the life cycle the way that she does. Now, I know other people do, and you know, and different things may be a little different, but the point is, it all made really good sense to me that that we're in the process of becoming whole as we learn to get rid of the dualisms that are in our life, and face them and realize that they're there. And so anyway, it's closing. It's interesting that healthy ego building of the first half. In other words, this is normal and good, even though there's things lost in it. It's healthy for the first half of life, but it's followed by a healthy ego decline in the second half of life. In other words, you don't have to wait till death to bring yourself back together to wholeness. You can achieve this through some personal spiritual practices before death. Why wait until you're on your deathbed to put yourself back together into a whole person?
Don't you think when we get older, we just realize what's important in life? That
Right.
family, feelings, that kind of thing is important. The car is not important.
Right.
The gift is not important. You
Right.
know, you just realize all that. I'm finding that out so much. What's truly important is like my granddaughter spending time with me. Like, don't give me flowers, spend time with me.
Right, exactly. Yeah, gifts become, some people, they say there's 5 love languages, so to speak, that consist of different things like quality time, physical touch. Let's see, some of the others are gifts. Some people feel affirmed through gifts. Others just through, like I said, quality time spent together. So we all receive love in different ways, but as we age in general, I think we become less about the things,
And I think
accumulating more
time is
things.
more important to
Yeah,
us,
time.
you know?
Exactly.
We realize time is running out and we have to, you know.
Right. So the point is that in the second half of life, elders are able to see and understand this full cycle of life from a much broader perspective than children. Children wouldn't be able to grasp all of this, and they couldn't because they haven't experienced a lot of it. But we are, and so we have this ability to then share with kids, like you said, that it's not about stuff and how beautiful you look, etc. It's an inner thing, and inner beauty radiates outward. And so there are people who, by the a lot of standards, wouldn't be considered quote beautiful or attractive, but their radiant personality and love makes up for all of it. And so that's what I wanted to cover today, and it helped me a lot, and I hope that it gives you some greater understanding, and I do recommend the book.
Dave, what is that book? I'm going to the library on the way home.
Yeah, it's called The Grace in Dying. And by the way, she's also written The Grace in Living, The Grace in Aging, and The Grace in Dying. So she really left the world with three really good, I've listened to the audiobooks for the other two, but the one on dying actually was the most transformational to me because it very few people are explaining this type of thing to people, and nor have they had the experience. One of the other things she noticed, she talks about in the book, is that oftentimes people who were very religious in life had the hardest time with the nearing death experience, because they have notions of, am I good enough? I'm not going to go to hell. And so they have all these fears and all these regrets, and they're more nervous about dying than people sometimes who've had no spiritual or experience at all or dedication. She calls the dying experience enlightenment at gunpoint, which is a good way to put it, because death is something that not any of us are getting out of alive, okay? So we might as well face that and embrace it rather than shunning it, not talking about it. There's actually movements around to have dinners where you gather with your family and discuss your wishes and things like that, and plan ahead of time and talk about it, rather than just leaving it all up, never discussing the subject and leaving it all up to a family member to decide that, just like similar to what I did with writing my obituary prior to my surgery last year. So,
Dave, what's your last name?
Singh, S-I, it's on your
N-G?
paper here too, S-I,
G-H, I bet.
yeah, G-H.
Kathleen.
Kathleen, yeah,
with a K.
Kathleen Dowling Singh.
Oh, Dowling.
Mm-hmm. And she's a very down-to-earth writer, even though she has her degree in whatever. She's got a number of degrees. She's a doctor.
Yeah, so it's S-I-N-G-H.
H-G-H, correct.
And that is a very Sikh name.
Yes. I think she's actually Buddhist, I think.
Uh-huh.
But what she does, she quotes from all of the wisdom traditions, so that it isn't just her view from one perspective. It's basically a universal belief at the higher levels of all wisdom traditions. And so I appreciated that about her. She's quoting from Jesus just as much as Buddha or anyone else. So that makes the book very inclusive for understanding this, and not just for a certain person. Well, I thought I would share one of mine, and then if anyone else is feeling like sharing from the story of your life, story of my life, I came up with a total of 51 little chapters which again, for those just joining, if you can write for a half hour a day for 8 weeks, theoretically you can come up with 50 or so memoirs in the 4 seasons of life that can be put together. And especially if you write a mission statement. I did write a introduction to it, which I went through quite a bit of editing. Now, where did I put it? Oh, it's not even in this draft. Yeah, so it's a lot of things have changed since I printed this out. But eventually you're going to want to print it out and get out a red pen and really go to town on it. Wait till you get it. I'd say wait till you get it done to do that, because there's a certain joy of just getting enough of them done to where you feel like, and then there's a certain joy to whacking it back down to, or if you have a friend that can help you with that. But I was going to today just share mine, number 19, chapter 19, the hardest part of growing up, which I thought was a good prompting question, because you know, we all have bumps along the road. The hardest thing I faced growing up was not having an actively engaged father or stepfather who took an interest in my life, my interests, and my future. That was, you know, and you don't appreciate it until later. You kind of just adapt to it at the time. But I know that in an era characterized by both parents working full-time, which is when I grew up, I'm far from being alone on this. Many people, many kids were in the same situation. I remember wanting to learn from my stepdad, Keith, but it seemed like everything I tried to do, whether repairing something around the house or building something new, I was always told, stay back, stay out of the way. I'm doing this. And, you know, I don't think it was always intentional, that, you know, trying to injure my fragile self-confidence still hurt nonetheless. So over time, you learn to stop asking to be a helper, and because I knew what the answer was going to be, and so I wouldn't ask him for help on anything with school projects, assignments, and this also carried forward into other activities like sports and other what would be normal father-son activities, going to ball games, things like that. He was always just too busy, and so I saw my other friends doing this with their fathers, and so I sensed this loss of a father that was interested in doing stuff. Of course, resilient as I was, I came up with other activities to fill the void, some of them not so good, mischievous things, but my primary takeaway was that he was just too busy, too important to invest his time in fathering me, or my brother for that matter either. So it wasn't just me, you know, it was my brother Kevin. In fact, he had 2 other children, we were his stepchildren, and he didn't spend time fathering them either. So, you know, clearly it wasn't only to be taken as an attack against me, but it was nonetheless, you know, the case. The net effect was that I began to formulate the best way to cope with life without a father's guiding hand. And by the way, it's no mistake that one of my favorite shows was Father Knows Best, and, you know, Leave It to Beaver. Mr. Cleaver was always really there as a, you know, so you look up to that as a role model. But so one of the ways I coped was to simply do whatever I felt was best, without any counsel, other than maybe, you know, my peer group, my friends. What do you think? You know, and of course they're going to say lean toward the wrong way to go. Anyway, I also resolved that if and when I become a father, I'm going to be very involved with my children's lives. So it was kind of like having a negative fatherly experience made me want to be opposite of that. And as is the case now, I have close relationships with all my kids, and I became the good cop most of the time in the marriage, making my ex-wife the bad cop, which also I see wasn't really fair, but it was just the persona that I took, in part because the way my father was, and I wanted to go the opposite way. In retrospect, I now have more compassion for Keith, knowing how difficult it can be to juggle work, play, family priorities, and in his case, education, because he worked his way from a policeman to special forces or special CII, whatever that was, California, like the California FBI. Then he went to night school and became an attorney, and then he ultimately became a judge. So his career was obviously his priority. I only met Keith's father, Harry, once or twice as a child, and I believe that Keith inherited his hands-off perspective of child rearing from his father, who was also a regular drinker, as Keith was. So, they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Likely Keith did his best that he could, given the lacking model that he had as a father. The notion of the sins of the father being passed on to the children sadly is a truism, unless we're able to undergo some kind of a transformation and in some cases be adopted in by a heavenly father and remodel our thinking about fatherhood, because obviously the model that we had on earth didn't work out very well. And so if we look to, in my case, at becoming a Christian at age 20, this is actually my 50th anniversary now, just turning 70. You see my hat that my daughter got. We begin to see a father that's very inclusive, always inviting you to the table, makes you always feel like you belong. And so, and also I had a grandfather that went on the occasions I saw him, which was not that frequently, but whenever we did, he would have me caddy for him and do different things that in his workshop that helped in a way fill that gap. So anyway, so that's a little slice of my life story and one of the regrets that I have. But we don't get to pick our parents. We got them, and we get to live with them, good, bad, and later on, sometimes we appreciate them more. As I reflected on the whole good cop, bad cop, my mom was definitely the good cop to me. My dad stood for law and order, and I was just a polar opposite. I was like the child of the 60s, long hair, bell bottoms, musician, experimenting with pot, all that. And he was busting people like me all day long, and you come home to me and it'd be like, we were just
My
constantly.
father was a police officer.
Your father?
Yes.
Yeah. So you
And
can relate.
so I was, my brother ended up selling drugs out of our house, and my dad didn't know it.
Ooh.
He got thrown in jail and everything else. You wouldn't believe it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It happens a lot, especially people who are really caught up in their career, and
Yeah.
what are you going to do about it? I mean, it's hard because you want to, we're told that our success in life is by climbing upwardly, being upwardly mobile. Isn't that what everyone wants?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But yet, in the spiritual world or in the higher levels of thinking, it's not just about upward mobility. It's also humility and downward mobility, and utilizing the time and being present rather than always worried about the future. So it's easy to be more critical, but getting it out in paper and writing about it helped me to, and I did later reconcile with my stepfather. After I became a Christian, I actually could see that he was doing the best he could, and so we became not close, but respectful later in life, and I later in life do appreciate what he was tried to do, even though at the time I'm sure I was like his worst nightmare, and later apologized profusely for running away and hurting my mom and doing different things. So anyway, so that's a little slice out of my story. Anybody want to share something? We have a little time. What time is it?
I don't want to share anything because But I just touched on what you said, brought me back to when I spent some time with nuns,
Mm-hmm.
grew up Catholic, and I remember telling one of the nuns that I like your stories about the angels that take care of the people in limbo,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm more interested in the higher up guys like the archangels. Now tell me some stories about archangels.
Right.
And they didn't know any. And I said, surely there must be some guys between here and God, between the priest and the Monsignor
Mm-hmm.
and the God, and they couldn't come up with it. And I remember I must have been 10 or 11 or
Wow.
at the time, and that started to turn me off against the nuns.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're all victims of our training, and you know, a lot of times questions like that can catch people, and they're unable to answer them. So for a young child, it's like, well, you know, why should I have confidence in you? You can't even explain that, you know. But you know, whatever we were brought up with, I wasn't brought up in any particular religious background. I only remember a few years being stuck onto a school bus or a church bus to go to Sunday school and back. And I think it was more just to give my parents some free time away from my brother and I, you know, not because they believed or wanted to go at all themselves. We'd come home with lessons, coloring things that we'd done and show it to them, and they were like, okay, cool, you know. Anyway, so, but, you know, everything that's happened in our life up until now has a purpose, and everything, as one of my favorite authors says, belongs where it was, and can't do anything about it to change it anyway. So we might as well try to get the lesson out of it. And as is often said, we learn more by doing it wrong than by doing it right, in whether that's our parenthood or our career or our relationships, whatever it is. It's in the doing it wrong that we learn, hopefully, lessons. Some people are the definition of what insanity, doing the same thing over and expecting a different result.
Yeah.
We all have areas like that maybe in our life too. Anyway, we have about 10 minutes. Does anybody else want to share this week one of their memoirs?
Can I read the front page of mine?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
introduction then.
Yeah, well, no, it's, you know, I want to read this idea of I'm approaching the whole task a little different,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to be doing kind of my collected works.
Okay.
And really my purpose in writing my collected works is to help inspire other people to care about the earth and to understand that it's a place where we can all come to harmony.
Mm-hmm.
And so if my children understand that, then that to me would be my message that I would leave them. So I have this little pamphlet, and I wrote, healthy soil, healthy earth, healthy you, help our soil live again. And did you know that 2/3 of the Earth's landmass is classified as a desert with deteriorated or dead soil ecosystems? And did you know that if we reclaim our soil, it will sequester carbon to reduce global warming? And did you know that due to unhealthy soil on farms, most food lacks nutrition and quality? And that healthy, rich soil produces nutritious, tasty food? And did you know many ancestral lands are no longer farmable, resulting in population redistribution and the whole immigration problem? And did you know that you can start today to rejuvenate Earth's soil ecosystems? Did you know that healthy organic soil with no chemicals will improve water quality in stormwater ponds and the bay? And that soil legacy is a personal gift for your children and the earth? And did you know that you, your family, and your friends can grow a homegrown national forest? If these questions pique your interest, this Introduction to Soil Health pamphlet is for you. Healthy soil activities create thriving soil ecosystems. Soil enhancements such as compost, worm castings, and other organic amendments support healthy soil ecosystems. Biodynamic, restorative permaculture, and regenerative are terms for ecological landscapes that support insects, mycorrhizal fungi, and soil microbial communities necessary for healthy plants that produce nutritious food. The heart of this pamphlet is growing a thriving ecological landscape, and it inspires individual action. Planting native plants, growing a garden in earth boxes, planting a small garden plot, joining a community garden, planting an edible landscape, or nurturing a backyard food forest are several action options. For an overview and inspiration, 2 movies to watch are Biggest Little Farm on Netflix, Prime Video, or Hulu, and Kiss the Ground on Netflix or YouTube. Then check out these websites, Biodynamic Agriculture and Homegrown National Park. And then it goes on into the article itself, and then at the end, we give them a whole lot of resources. But the whole thing that I've been about for my whole career has been bringing people to awareness about environmental things.
Mm-hmm.
So for 7 years, I had a monthly eco forum where I invited green businesses, and I collected over 200 businesses in Sarasota based on their products, their practices, and their philosophy. And then we talked about the Earth Charter. So this has really been my life's work, and this is kind of a continuation of it, which was interesting that it came up again, because when I had a stroke, I didn't know what I was supposed to do, but it turns out I really realized that I'm supposed to do the same thing I was doing, you know, and it's not done yet. So that's
wonderful.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great legacy to leave, and certainly not everybody has a backyard. You know, some people don't, but you can still support. And I know that I've heard of a lot of people wanting to do backyard gardens, things like that. So you're offering suggested tips and resources on how to make it more enriched, I guess, and produce more.
Well, what I'm really trying to do is help them understand that they have a soil legacy, that they have an impact on soil, that their decisions matter, and that it's kind of like something, you know, I'm sure over time people didn't really realize that clothes mattered. Then all of a sudden clothes mattered, or that their health mattered. Then all of a sudden health mattered. Well, what I'm trying to explain to people is that your soil and how you treat the soil and how the people that you hire to treat your soil and the people who are controlling your soil, that matters.
Right.
And so, you know, even that there's actually Florida statutes that allow you to plant native plants and vegetable gardens now on your lawn. Well, people don't know that. So then we're trying to give them that awareness and build that awareness.
Great.
So, anyway, that's
Wonderful. That's
Like
your
you
story,
said.
and you're sticking to it.
Yeah, you got it. You got it.
The soil matters.
Yeah.
Old lives matter.
Yeah.
A friend who turned 70 got a mug that said that old lives matter.
That's cute.
That was cool. Anyway, well, thanks for sharing that, and I think it'll be great that you're going to go ahead and write your memoirs around that theme, and then publish it as a paperback that's available for those that want to go deeper into it, right?
Right, and then it'll be intermixed with things that I wrote over the years.
Right. Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's a unifying theme that is great. Great. Glad that we can be a little part in encouraging you to pull that together. Well, is there any questions? I don't know, what time is it? It's yeah, it's 11:49, so it's almost
I have a
lunchtime.
quick one for you.
Huh?
You went those statistics that you gave regarding everybody who wants to
Mm-hmm.
do this, 89% or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And, but about 1% actually end up doing it. To bridge that gap, I mean, I'm sure that part of your business is to help people write their own,
Mhm.
or is it? I mean, I know there are people that do that.
Yeah.
I met Liz Corson, do you know her?
No, but that doesn't.
She's one of these people, that's her prime business, is to help people who are trying to write a book, whether it's their own personal biography.
Right, or any kind of book,
Any
right?
kind, to do it right and get it on the market.
Mm-hmm.
And she's the one that, I met her because I wanted to see the story that the Sarasota real estate guy, who's 96, 97 now, who was one of the first people on site at Dachau, liberating Dachau. So he wrote a book about it called Boy Soldier. And he needed some help on that, and so I don't know how he stumbled into Liz, but she got involved and helped him write it,
Right.
edited the whole thing,
Mhm.
marketed it, and
Right.
then helped him go around and talk about it later.
Yes. I've been through, to answer your question, I published 8 books
Yeah,
on economic topics, and then gone about getting them onto Amazon and other places to sell
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
Then gone on to help book media interviews to have them talk about the book.
yeah,
And so I'm familiar with the full cycle of it.
sure.
And I am making myself available. The class is free, giving the resources away free. But the editing and publishing of it and promotion of it, if you are planning to do that, would be something that I would consult with on a small fee basis based on
Yeah,
how
I
much
think that's
time
the
it
way
takes.
she does it too.
Yeah, and so I'm kind of looking at it as a possible encore career for me.
Oh, yeah.
But I thought I would start by writing my own and doing a class on it, and classes will always be free, but at the end, after you get done, if you need help, because you really do need another set of eyes to edit it, and the proof will be when you see that mine will have a few little bloopers in it, I know, because when you put together 140 pages and you don't spend a lot of time, but I wanted to get it done in time for this class, so I only did a limited number of them, and so I plan to go through and re-edit it before I do more seriously. But to answer your question, yes, I'm available to help with that in any way that I can, and be happy to do that. You have my email and all that to do it, and can give an estimate based on how many pages it is, and et cetera. So, yeah.
I've had a couple of friends that their wives are the ones that kind of did all this type of thing, editing and getting it published.
Yeah, that can work too.
But I think that people that I talk with, and I say, I'm going to this class because I want to do this sometime, I want to write my own book.
Mhm.
They say, oh, that's impossible, that's too much work. And I say, well, I know 2 of them that had them published, and they're really happy they did. I'll just say, look, when you come to that point, then there's people out here that do that kind
Right.
of thing. You hire them then.
Exactly.
But at least get started.
Yeah,
Do
I mean,
something.
the cost to have somebody start you from total scratch to do it would be much, much higher than if you have
Oh, yeah.
a manuscript and
Exactly.
they have something to start whacking and changing.
Yeah.
It's a huge difference. Plus, you've done all the hard work
That's
of
right.
pulling out the memories and writing them out,
Yeah.
and again, there are online things that'll do it at a fairly low cost, but they're not going to, give you a lot of editing
No.
improvements to it unless you pay an additional fee. So, there's lots of help out there once you can get your first draft done, but a lot of people are just scared with the notion
Yeah.
of even
Yeah.
putting that together. So,
I just didn't know about the cost. It was kind of expensive. I don't know if I'll ever be able to publish my book.
well, it's
Well, it's not
how many
very
copies do you want? I mean, it's not that expensive.
Can I get like 10 copies if I
Yeah.
want just to friends? I mean,
Exactly.
I wanted to get it on the market, but I don't have, hundreds of dollars.
You can get, for mine, ends up being 140 pages, and I went with full color throughout, because I got about 30 photos and they look so much better. It was, I think, $18.50 or so per copy for 20. So it'll be a
That's
little
not
bit
bad.
more if you
That's not
only do
bad.
10, but maybe you don't really care if all the photos are black and white. That
Right,
that would
right.
make it, cut it down. So, I mean, we're talking about 10 copies, even if it was $30, that would still be, you know, $300, you know, $30 to
Okay.
give them a nice bound book rather than something stapled or, you know, that
Right,
looks
right.
temporary.
Yeah.
So that's really not that expensive to do, but you have to have it in a Word document that you submit to
Right.
them, and hopefully a cover design, so you might need a little help with that. But yeah, it's not that hard to do, and the turnaround, I just submitted it to them 10 days ago, and it's supposed to arrive today.
And
So
who
by-
is
Wow.
it that you use?
I used, and I put it in the book, it's called smartpress.com.
Press.
And you can get an estimate based on the number of pages, how many copies, whether you want black and white or color, whether you want 8.5 by 5.5, or what I did was 6 by 9. That's called trade size. The other is called what is it? Mass market. It's a little bit smaller. The less paper and the less color, the less cost. But I was actually pleased to find that I could get anything in that small quantity, perfect bound, because it used to be to get something perfect bound, you had to do hundreds or thousands of copies. And then you could get the cost down to $2 or $3 per, you know, those are all the books that we put out. We did a minimum of 5,000 or 10,000, but we had plans for them to market. This is a different animal, but you can still get it done looking just as professional as you know, a book that's going to be published by a major publisher. It's just going to cost you more per unit to do it.
Right.
So, anyway, alrighty, folks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
Until
you.
next time, we'll pick up with some writing tips, and look forward to that next week.